Hi everyone, today our group is going to present an article regarding asset allocation theory. The title is Optimal versus Naive Diversification, How Efficient is the 1/n portfolio strategy? And the background of the article is that a series of mean-variance asset allocation models has been developed since Markowitz. However, in real life, we cannot circumvent estimation risks when applying those models. And one-third of this article wanted to explore under what conditions those mean-variance optimal portfolio models can be expected to perform well despite the estimation risk. In the article, a benchmark portfolio is constructed using a so-called 1/n strategy, which simply allocates 1/n fraction of wealth to each of n available assets. Then, they compared out-of-sample performance of 14 sample-based mean-variance portfolios with the 1/n portfolio in terms of Sharpe ratio, certainty equivalent return, and turnover, which is the trading value. And what models involved in the article are listed there. And the structure of our presentation today is that at first, Feng Ruiwan will introduce these different asset allocation models. Then Enwen will illustrate the methodology for evaluating performance. After that, Liu Yezi will demonstrate the empirical results, and next, Bingyan will explain the analytical results. Then Chong will show the results from simulated data, and at last, Liu Nuozhou will present the result of robustness check and conclusions. Now, let me pass time to Feng Ruiwan to take a closer look at these models.
So this part is the brief introduction to the different asset allocation models. And here are some definitions, like the M denote the length of the moments for the moments estimation, and the T is the total length of the data series. And the XT is the portfolio weight in terms of the N is risky assets. And accordingly, the relative weights with the only risk asset is denoted as the WT, which is equal to the XT divided by the sum of it. And the absolute value guarantee is direction. And in terms of the expected utility for the investors, we assume that investor only consider about the first two order about the portfolio and ignore all the higher order moments. And the gamma is the investor's risk aversion. And here is the solution for the optimization. And the relatively weights is also equal to the XT divided by its sum. And here are some models that is studied in the following part. The first is the naive portfolio, which is actually the equally weighted portfolio. And this portfolio implies that the expected returns is proportional to the total risk. And this involves no optimization or estimation. And the second kind is the mean variance portfolio, which is just plug the computation results from the sample data into the equation 2 that mentioned before. And this can ignore the possibility of the estimation error. And the third kind is the Bayesian approach to the estimation error. And the first kind is the diffuse prior, but the performance is not distinguishable from the mean variance portfolio, so we just ignore it. And the second, the BS portfolio, the parameters is defined as the equation 4 and 5, and this is actually can be a shrinkage to the average mean, which can shrink it to the grand mean. And third is the DM portfolio, which is actually a further refinement of the shrinkage portfolio. And the investors' belief about the asset pricing models like the CAPM from the French is actually determining the shrinkage target of this model, and they denote an alpha to reflect the mispricing, which imply that with the 95% probability that the investor believes that the mispricing is between the -2% and the +2%. And the fourth kind of is just with the portfolios with the moment restrictions, and the first kind of is just to minimize the variance. And the second is so-called the MP portfolio, which is actually at the situation that there are some unobserved factors. And under this situation, from the previous study, we can know the resulting mispricing is actually contained in the covariance matrix. So in the equation 7, we define the sigma, and all of those parameters here is obtained from the maximum likelihood approach. And the next is just put some short sale constraints on the portfolios that I mentioned before. And the first kind of is MVC portfolio. It's actually a shrinkage on the expected returns, and the minimum variance constraint portfolio is actually the shrinkage on the covariance metrics. And they also raise a new kind of portfolio, which is a combination of the equilibrated portfolio with the minimum variance constraint portfolio. And when the A is equal to 0, it's the pure minimum variance portfolio, and when it's equal to 1/n, it's actually a kind of the naive portfolio. And in this paper, they just denote the A as the half of the 1/n. And the last kind of is just the optimal combination of different portfolios, and this involves the mean variance with the minimum variance portfolio. And this paper also raises another kind of, which is the equally weighted portfolio with the minimum variance portfolio, which can avoid to estimate the mean returns. And the C and D is actually obtained to maximize the investor's utility, is expected utility.
My part is the methodology for evaluating performance. I'd like to discuss our analysis approach first. Our analysis relies on a rolling sample approach. And first, we come up with the T-month data set, and then choose the estimation window length m, and estimate the parameters by applying the data from t equals to 1 to t equals to m, and then compute the predicted return by applying the parameters. And then, after all these steps, we could realize the t minus m out of sample returns. Our first methodology is Sharpe ratio. Sharpe ratio is used to help investors understand the return of an investment compared to its risk, which is the basic performance evaluating methodology in our analysis. And first, we calculate the out-of-sample Sharpe ratio. We also calculate the p-value between our new strategy and the naive portfolio to test whether the Sharpe ratios of two strategies are statistically distinguishable. And then we also calculate the in-sample Sharpe ratio. We use the entire excess returns to compute in-sample Sharpe ratio and apply this Sharpe ratio to assess the effect of estimation error on performance to check whether our strategy is stable. Then we also calculate the certainty equivalent return, and the definition of CEQ is the risk-free rate that an investor is willing to accept rather than adopting a particular risky portfolio strategy. And in this equation, mu k and sigma k are the mean and variance of out-of-sample excess returns for strategy k, and gamma is the risk aversion. And in our paper, our assumption is that the result we report are for the case of gamma equals to 1. And then we also calculate the turnover, which is the average sum of the absolute value of the trades across the n available assets, or equivalent, or the amount of trading required to implement each portfolio strategy. And in this equation, this part is the portfolio weight before rebalancing at time t plus 1, and this part is the desired portfolio weight at time t plus 1. We also calculate the evolution of wealth for strategy K, and the return from strategy K on the portfolio of n assets before rebalancing is this, and the cost of such a trade over all assets is follows this formula. And at last, we calculate the return loss. This is the additional return needed to strategy K to perform as well as the naive portfolio in terms of the Sharpe ratio, and is defined as this formula.
In this section, we compare the performance of the optimal asset allocation strategies. Firstly, the Sharpe ratio. The first row of table 3 gives us the Sharpe ratio of the naive 1/n benchmark strategy for the various data sets being considered. Note that the difference between the in-sample Sharpe ratio for the mean variance strategy and the 1/n strategy gives a measure of the loss from naive rather than optimal diversification when there is no estimation error. And for the data sets we are considering this difference is substantial, which means that the effect of estimation error is so large that it erodes cumulative gains from the optimal diversification. Thus, our first observation is that out of sample, the 1/n strategy typically outperforms the sample-based mean variance strategy if one were to make no adjustment at all for the presence of estimation error. But what about the out-of-sample performance of optimal allocation strategies that explicitly account for estimation error? Unfortunately, our second observation is that, in general, Bayesian strategies do not seem to be very effective at dealing with estimation error. As we can see from the table, Sharpe ratios for the Bayesian portfolios are lower than the 1/n strategy and are only slightly better than that for the sample-based mean variance portfolio. Our third observation is that the portfolios that are based on restrictions on the moments of returns, if we ignore the estimates of expected return altogether, but exploiting the information about the correlations, does lead to better performance relative to the out-of-sample mean variance strategy, MV. Next, our observation 4. Contrary to the view commonly held among practitioners, constraints alone do not improve performance sufficiently. Sharpe ratio of the sample-based mean variance constraint strategy, MVC and BSC, are lower than the 1/n strategy. Next, note that the Sharpe ratios of the mean C and G mean C are higher than that of the 1/n strategy for some datasets, and strategies that combine portfolio constraints with some form of shrinkage of expected returns are usually much more effective in reducing the effect of estimation error. And the comparison of CEQ returns in Table 4 confirms the conclusions from the analysis of Sharpe ratios. That is, the in-sample mean variance strategy has the highest CEQ return, but out of sample, none of the strategies from the optimizing models can earn a CEQ return that is statistically better than that of the 1/n strategy. Next, let's look at the portfolio turnover. Panel A reports the turnover of all the strategies relative to that of the 1/n strategy. We can see that in all cases, the turnover for the portfolios from the optimizing models is much higher than that of the benchmark strategy. And turnover in the MKT, SMB, and HML dataset is quite small. Besides, turnover of different strategies have relationship like this. Next, from the above discussion, we conclude that in general, in terms of Sharpe ratio, the 1/n strategy is better than the constrained policies and better than the unconstrained policies. And in terms of CEQ, no strategy from the optimal models is consistently better than the benchmark strategy. And in terms of portfolio turnover, only VW strategy, in which the investor holds the market portfolio and does not trade at all, is better than the 1/n strategy.
Then we come to the analytical results. And in this part, we focus on the why optimizing portfolio do not perform better than the naive equally weighted portfolio. The focus is to find the relationship between the expected performance which is measured by the solidity equivalent return of the optimizing strategy and the equally weighted strategy as a function of these four parameters: the number of assets n, length of estimation window m, and the Sharpe ratio of the tendency portfolio, and also the Sharpe ratio for the equally weighted strategy. Here, the methodology is that we treat the weights as an estimator, which can be directly derived from the sample data. If we only focus on the mean variance utility, then we can get the optimal weights in this form, which is the same as we derived in the class. Then we define the expected loss function as a deviation from the actual maximized utility and the expected utility based on the sample estimation. Then, if we further assume that the returns are jointly normal, the sample mean will also follow the normal distribution, and the sample variance will follow the weight distribution like this. Then, if we define the critical value as the smallest number of the estimation period that is necessary for the mean variance portfolio to outperform the equally weighted portfolio, here formally it's defined as infimum of this m, which makes the mean variance portfolio performs better. The loss is smaller. Then here comes the three propositions. First, we denote the S star as the Sharpe ratio of the tendency portfolio, and SEW as the Sharpe ratio for the equally weighted portfolio. Proposition 1 is if the mu is unknown and the sigma is known, then the mean variance strategy has a lower expected loss than the equally weighted portfolio if this inequality is satisfied. As you can see, as the number of the asset decreases and the length of estimation window m increases, this inequality becomes, there is higher probability for this inequality to be satisfied. This is quite intuitive since the less assets we need to estimate and the longer estimation horizon it is, the more accurate results we can obtain. Then if mu is known and sigma is unknown, the inequality becomes like this. The same conclusion also holds as the previous one. Finally, if both mu and sigma are unknown, here positive number h is subtracted from the left-hand side as the previous equation, which means that this inequality is more unlikely to be satisfied compared to the previous one. Finally, here are the analytical results based on some actual data. Here, from previous table 3, we find that the typical Sharpe ratio for the tendency portfolio in different data sets are respectively 40%, 20%, and 15%. So in the following figures, they also set the Sharpe ratio to these three different figures. Also from the table 3, we find that the equally weighted portfolio has a Sharpe ratio that's almost half of the Sharpe ratio of the tendency portfolio. So here, SEW is set to be half of this figure. Then in this panel, SEW is also set to be half of this figure, and you also want to know some extreme cases, so the SEW in that figure is set to be even lower. Finally, in the last figure, here the Sharpe ratio, this Sharpe ratio is based on the simulated results in sections 5, the simulated data, which will be covered later. As you can see, there are two very interesting findings in these figures. Firstly, that from this line to the middle line, this one, this gap represents the difference of the estimation accuracy from when mu is unknown to mu is known, which means that there are lots of estimation error that can be attributable to the estimation of sample mean. And also another finding is that the number of critical lengths for the estimation period is very striking. For example, when asset is 50, the estimation length for this the critical estimation length exceeds to more than 6,000, which is very infeasible in reality, since normally we only have most decades of data to estimate. So the overall conclusion here is that it's highly unlikely for the mean variance portfolio to outperform the equally weighted portfolio.
In this section, the author used simulated data to analyze the performance of each strategy. We are keen to know how the performance of each strategy varies with the change of number of set n and the change of the length of estimation window m. The author generates independently and identical normal distribution data. With the use of the normal standard distribution data, the mean variance and most of its various extensions are favored. On the other hand, normal distributed data eliminate the existence of anomaly, such as small firm effect, calendar effect, and factorial effect, etc. In this model, we assume there are n risky assets and one risk-free asset in the market. Since what we assume is a single factor model, we set k equals to 1. The alpha is the mispricing coefficient factors. The B is the vector loading matrix that is uniformly distributed between 0.5 to 1.5. The RBT, which is excess return vectors on the factor portfolio, and E is the error terms. So in these models, we generated 24,000 months of data and considered the case with n equals to 10, 25, and 50, and window size of 120 months, 360 months, and 60,000 months. Let's take a look at the result. The first result we're looking at is a mean variance portfolio. The out-of-sample mean variance strategy performs better when estimation window is longer and the number of assets is smaller. However, it only outperforms the 1/n strategies when n equals to 10 and m equals to 60,000. It confirms what we got from our last sector. Similarly, for BS models, we got a similar result as MV strategies. It only outperforms the 1/n strategy when n equals to 10 and m equals to 6,000. On the other hand, the DM model performs much better than MV and BS when sigma alpha is 1%. However, it still requires more than 120 months, which is 10 years, to achieve a higher return. And it does not perform better than 1/n strategy for all the cases when n equals to 50. The MP strategy performs similar to 1/n in all cases, but no better than that. The reason why it performs well in all cases might be because we assume it's a single factor model. There are no unobservable factors in the market, which is quite ideal for the case. Another interesting result we found out from the model data is the short selling constraint only favors the result when estimation is small. One possible explanation of this is that when estimation window is long, the estimation error is smaller. Hence, the constraints reduce performance. As a result, overall, we find that no strategy outperforms the 1/n at all times. There are a few cases that it requires some specific parameter balance, that is small asset size and long window size, which is more than 10 years, to outperform 1/n strategy.
To test the robustness of their results, at first, the authors check their assumptions. A lot of assumptions are made in their analysis. For example, the length of the estimation window is 120 months, estimation window is rolling, and the holding period is 1 month, and so on. And the authors changed their assumptions to different scenarios and checked for the results. And they found that the results are mostly the same, which indicates that their findings are not sensitive to assumptions. Then the authors checked the out-of-sample performance of cross-sectional characteristic model proposed by Grant, St. Clara, and Vaknov. As we know, what their findings were drawn from mean variance models, so they wanted to see whether these results would vary when applying different models. They found that such cross-sectional model did generate higher Sharpe ratio than 1/n model, but the difference was statistically indistinguishable, and the turnover of this model was substantially higher than 1/n portfolio. Besides, cross-sectional characteristic model has a limitation that it cannot be applied to counter-indexes, since that we don't know what are the characteristics of counter-indexes. Therefore, this model still could not outperform 1/n model. And last, the author checked how these mean variance portfolios perform if the moments are estimated dynamically rather than statically. As a result, these mean variance portfolios still could not outperform 1/n portfolio. After all those analyses, we found that out-of-sample Sharpe ratio of mean variance strategy is much lower than that of 1/n strategy, which indicates that the errors in estimating mean and the covariances erode what the gains from optimal diversification. We also find that various extensions to the sample-based mean variance model also cannot outperform 1/n portfolio. These findings have some implications. Firstly, although there has been considerable progress in the design of optimal portfolios, more effort needs to be devoted to improving the estimation of the moments, and especially the expected returns. Secondly, considering the simplicity and good performance of 1/n portfolio, it should serve as a natural benchmark to assess the performance of more sophisticated asset allocation rules. And that's all of our presentation. Thank you.